Be just seconds away from recording. All right, there we go.
Okay. Greetings, everyone, on this lovely Monday in late December of 2020. We're almost done with 2020, knock on wood. I will call this meeting to order. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none. Public comments on items not related to the agenda. And I believe I saw Katie Burke, your hand is raised.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Great, so my name is Katie Burke. I have 3 kiddos in the Windsor school system, a 10th grader, a 7th grader, and a 5th grader. I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to come on tonight and just touch base with all of you, to thank you for your hard work during the planning that you all did to open schools and get students back into the building. I think that that's super important. I loved the opportunity to have my kids go on a half day in a time where there were a lot of things that we really weren't sure about. And I think that we've had this tremendous benefit and opportunity to gather a lot of data. The Department of Health has done a great job presenting their COVID data weekly. And I think that one of the things that's come out of that data is the fact that schools are safe for kids, and that kids are not super spreaders like we once thought they may be. And so I'm just wondering if the committee that planned and came together with this half-day model has considered reconvening and considered bringing at least the elementary school kids. I mean, I'd love to see all of the kids eventually come back into the building, but I think the science supports the fact that pre-K through 7th grade doesn't those kiddos don't transmit COVID like we once thought they do. I know the same can't really be said with the middle school and high school population, but getting the elementary school kids back into the building is something that I feel like is tangible, and I wonder if that's a goal or anything that's on anybody's radar.
Yeah, Katie, this is Dave Baker. I don't know if we've ever met personally, but I'm sure you've heard my voice call snow days and all of that stuff in the district. So, but it's very timely that you should be on and be advocating for this. We've had this same type of statement from parents at a couple of our local board meetings, and actually, you're at the right board meeting, because it's the supervisory union board that has to make the final decision about a change in plan. So the simple answer to your question is the COVID task force or the reopening task force has reconvened. We've met a couple of times. We're going to meet again next week, and we are contemplating extending the elementary day. Anyhow, you're absolutely right. It seems like it's going to be easier at the elementary level than at the high school level because of just the way those courses are organized and the semester is set up. But I will say this as a bit of a caveat to what I'm saying is that all of this is a bit of a negotiations with all of the stakeholders, including the staff, and of course the parent voice is important. We still have some staff, even though we've had a really good run first semester. There are still some staff that are very anxious about the virus situation. What we plan to do is try to finalize an extension plan. It may not be the whole day, and that'll be because of some scheduling issues that are related to the master agreement and the contract. Because one of the things we feel we need to do is keep the kids in these pods, these restricted pods. We think that's been successful on a lot of different levels. And in order to keep these kids in those pods, we need all hands on deck. And what we've done is we've integrated the unified arts teachers in with the regular ed teachers, and they form these little pod teams, and they wrapped around different grade levels, and it's worked pretty well. But when you have a group of teachers with a group of kids for an extended period of time, you still have to provide them with a duty-free lunch and a planning period and all of those things that are guaranteed them by the master agreement, the union contract. So we think we can extend it, at least 45 minutes to an hour, and that's going to be a proposal that we finalize, I think, as early as next week. We still have a meeting with the union that needs to happen, and we are surveying some additional staff members just to kind of put the finishing touches on this. But I know the administrative team, I think I can speak for them. They're committed to doing exactly what you said. And
Yeah.
And we'll bring that plan back to this board, to the supervisory union board, to approve it. And even if we have to have a special meeting, remember, you approved the initial reopening plan, and then you gave me some authority over the course of the semester to vary that plan if I needed to. I haven't had to do that too much, but we'll do the same thing for second semester. I'll have this board. And the reason why this board has to deal with it is because our master agreement is unified. So all of the contract language, especially around school year and school day, cuts across all three districts. So we can't like have Wethersfield go off and do something and then Windsor go off and do something else, because it would be a breach of that master agreement. So
I do think that one of the things that I'd like to see moving forward is a little bit of flexibility in, I know that the master agreement is just that, it's the master agreement, but I think that in rural Vermont, one of the things that you come up against is that different towns run their schools really differently with staffing and with students, that, better than anyone. And I think that if there's one school or two schools in our district who are in a better place to have more students back in the building, I think we need to really consider that. And the one last thing that I'll say is that I really think that we have to acknowledge publicly how traumatic COVID-19 has been for not only the kids, but also the teachers in the building. And we have to come up with a way to deal with that trauma because it seems to be a real barrier. And we have to figure out how to make forward progress now that we're at the end of 2020 and we're at the beginning of 2021. And the reality is that we are in a bit of a different place with COVID. Like we're in a solid place. And so we have to tackle that trauma, I think, with the teachers and educators.
yeah, you're right.
But I'm
Katie,
super appreciative of everything you guys.
That's great. And Katie, the only thing I would probably correct in your last statement is we're in a solid place in schools right now. We're not in a solid place in terms of case. I mean, we haven't even seen the Christmas spike yet, so we don't know what that's going to do. I mean, your statement, schools seem to be pretty safe places to be, but I also would state I think they are safe places to be because we're staying in pods, we're keeping kids masked, we're staying socially distanced, and I will tell you that is exhausting. I will just tell you that, and that's why we have to have the union on board, the teachers on board, because but I really appreciate what you said, Katie. I think Jessica, Amy, I don't know if you can see it, but Jessica has her hand.
Jessica. Yeah, I was wondering if when you talk about extending the day, if that will be all at the end of the day. Our kids are getting on the bus like an hour later than they were last year. And I don't know if that was to accommodate for screening and everything like that. I don't know if that's now been, I know at our schools, that's really kind of been streamlined. So just wondering where that 45 minutes will come from.
Yeah, Jessica, I think that's a great question, and that has not been decided, but I think we might be able to pick up some on both ends of the day, but I'm speaking just for me. Like I said, we have not finalized the plan. I think we'll have that finalized soon, but I think we have gotten that health screening down to a science, and I think we are doing it in a more efficient manner. So maybe we could pick up 15 minutes on the other side. I know one thing that's been good for kids, probably not for parents, but we've seen it with high school kids for sure and middle school kids for sure, is that little bit of a later start has really worked for them. I know that that's not always working for parents, but that's something we want, we also want to keep in mind. But I think we can pick up maybe a little on both sides. I see some administrators. If anybody else wants to jump in, feel free to jump in, but we've talked about it certainly, and we're getting ready to finalize a plan here soon.
I see another person, Heather. I just want a reminder to people, we're talking about this conversation has been around COVID, and one of the items on the agenda is a COVID update.
Good point.
So if this is something related to COVID, if you could wait until we come to the COVID update so we can continue with the agenda. Because this particular item is public comments not related to the agenda. But you can go ahead, Heather.
No, I mean, mine is more about this conversation, but if we would like to move on and then do that, I'm happy to follow whatever.
Are you muted, Amy? You might be muted, Amy.
Amy, you're muted.
I think you might be muted, Amy.
Great. So if you let us know right now what your question was, and then maybe they can address it later in the meeting.
Sure. I was just going to ask more about this idea of pods and the fact that there are schools that are 5 days a week that have expanded their pods to include sort of other teachers in the building and such, that's the way that they're following their teachers' contracts. They're following everything they're supposed to be doing. And they still have this, like more expansive pod system. And it's working for them. They still have, there's no super spreading going on at these schools that are having pods that have been extended out so that teachers are able to have the things that it says in their contract.
Yeah. And Heather, we can certainly talk about that, but I also want to make sure that everybody understands that we are one of the few school districts or supervisory unions in the area that have our kids, all of our kids who want to, going 5 days a week. There are a lot of schools that are still on an AB day or a 2 days in, 1 day out, or 4 days a week, and then they take Friday off. We've got our kids in 5 days a week, and I think that's important to note.
Okay, thank you. So any other information on COVID will be in the COVID update item on the agenda. Bill, you briefly had your hand raised.
I just had a quick question for Heather, but I'll wait.
Okay. Great, so we will move on. I will take a motion to approve the minutes from previous meetings, November 23rd, November 30th, and December 14th.
I'll move. Nikki.
Second, Chris.
I'll second.
I'm Scott.
Okay.
Were there any changes, clarifications, corrections necessary? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes from November 23rd, November 30th, and December 14th, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great, thank you. And now on to item 5, the Anti-Racism Task Force. And I will hand it over to Nikki and others who have been working on this.
So we have a big update in that and as you guys saw by David's email earlier today, we did get a draft policy and it included draft procedures. we're not ready to share that yet, as the task force has not met to review that as a group. After this meeting, I emailed the task force and asked if you guys might be willing to stay on for a few minutes after this meeting to coordinate a time to meet, so that we can review this and hash this out as a task force. So if task force people, can you just give me a thumbs up if you're willing to stay on for a little bit? Awesome. Okay. So we'll just have 5 minutes of scheduling at the end of the meeting, to get us back on track. So a big update, but not much to say.
Excellent. Well, it's great to see the draft of the policy, and I look forward to hearing, I think the entire board, as well as the greater community, looks forward to hearing more on that. So, oh my gosh, here we are, COVID update.
Yeah, and I was just gonna, I raised my hand, but that's fine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna add to what Nikki said, just for the viewing public tonight. This is a very lucid draft now of a policy. And aside from the task force having to look at it and ultimately this board having to adopt it, I think there are gonna be suggestions for some larger groups to vet this policy, and maybe have some community forums around the policy just to get some feedback, because once we consider adopting this policy, we really have to own this. And this is really going to drive our work procedurally around racism for the next several years. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that it wouldn't be just the task force looks at it. And I know that's not what Nikki was saying. And then the SU board, adopts it. There'll be a lot of public review of this policy because it is really critical to our future. So that's it there. And now,
thank you, David. I didn't repeat that.
Yeah, that's okay. So now the COVID update, and really it's timely that some of the folks that are on tonight because one of the things we wanted to talk about, other than the fact that we feel we finished up reasonably strong throughout the year. I think our parents have been incredibly patient. I think our staff has been incredibly creative around the way they've gone about this and courageous in doing it. I mean, when I talk about this being exhausting work, I really mean that, because I'm not in that classroom every single day. I know when I visit a school and I visit classrooms and I have that mask on all day, it is draining. I'm sure all of you feel the same way when you're out socializing or shopping or doing whatever you got to do. And I also think that the teachers feel an incredible responsibility to our kids and to our families to remain safe. And the truth is, as somebody pointed out, I think it might have been Katie, schools have been acknowledged as pretty safe places in general. We've had 3 cases and represented by all 3 districts, quite frankly. So everybody got a little taste of a case, 2 adults and one child. And so, that's pretty good when you look at the number of hours and time that we've been in school. So I think I can say from the administrative team standpoint, that we think that initial reopening task force plan was a good plan. We were in the middle of, I think it was probably October, the end of October. We were starting to talk about whether or not we could increase the time. And we had started to share out a little bit of a plan around that. And lo and behold, somewhere around November and right through the Thanksgiving holiday, things began to spike again. And what that does is it creates a level of anxiety, I think, in our staff around this that then needs to be mitigated and needs to be dealt with. So we spent time, and again, I think this was Katie, trying to usher in some support for our staff, both from an emotional and mental health standpoint, and we slowed down the conversations around extending the school day. And we just picked those conversations up again in early December and called the task force back together again and called the union leadership back together again and started that conversation up. I know that Angie Ledoux is on the phone. The other thing that Angie's been good about doing is soliciting some staff feedback. And we've got that feedback. I don't know, Angie, if it's in a presentable form for tonight or not. Were you planning on presenting any of that?
I wasn't, but I know we had talked about it before break. So it is in a, I do have it in a slideshow. It's just that my Chromebook right now is not acting very well. It was not charged for the last week. So I'm just, can I get it up and running, and then I will let you know if I can
Yeah, that's
share
fine.
it.
Because we did solicit some feedback from folks on
Yes.
mostly around the remote time that we spend, and therein lies the problem, right? The issue is that there's no replacement for in-person instruction, right? Aside from the inconveniences of when the day starts or when the day ends or how parents react to that, the real issue from an educational standpoint is we feel that we do a much better job in person than we do remotely. And what we've got right now is a bit of a hybrid where the kids are in for 3 to 4 hours in the morning. Then we take a break so that we can get that planning period and duty-free lunch in. And then we do a remote piece in the afternoon. And I'm talking K to 8 now, not so much the high school. That's a different plan. But K to 8, that's how it works. And what we are really struggling with is that afternoon piece when the kids get home, if they get home. Remember, a lot of our kids go to childcares, a lot of them go to neighbors, a lot of them go to grandma and grandpa's house, and sometimes they're getting good support, sometimes they're not getting good support. Sometimes they have good Wi-Fi access, sometimes they don't have good Wi-Fi access. So that creates a problem whenever we're remote. So that's what's been motivating the team, and quite frankly, the teachers are relatively supportive of trying to get all of the instruction that needs to happen within the day, so that it's in person and that it's up close and that it's personal. And that's what we're planning to do. What we are not prepared to do, and I know that there are some schools, as Heather pointed out, there are some schools in our area. I don't know of any schools who are going 5 days a week, but maybe Heather does, and I'd certainly like to look at those schools. But I know that there are some schools right now who are allowing kids to venture out of the pods a little bit and go off to PE and go off to art and go off to music and then come back to their pods. We have not yet, as an administrative team or a staff, gotten comfortable with that model yet. And part of what we're going to be up against when we make this change is that we also have some requests from kids who have been remote for the first semester who want to come back now. And Angie, I don't know, do you have a total number on the kids who've requested to come back into school? Angie's turning her volume on.
My mic is on. Sorry. It is the number that have requested it somewhere around 20 or so.
Okay. So that's 20 more kids that we're going to have to bring back into the buildings. And if you recall, part of what we did logistically when we set these rooms up is that we tried to stay as close to that 6-foot distance as we could. As a matter of fact, I think almost all of our classrooms were 6-foot distanced. We think we can accommodate those 20 to 25 kids coming back and still stay at that 6-foot distance. But one of our schools in one of our grade levels is struggling with that a little bit. But I think in the end, we can work that out. So that's just another layer of planning that goes on getting ready for that second semester if we're going to extend the day. So anyhow, I think what you'll hear from the administrators that are on the line. I see Christine Bourne is here from Heartland. She's the principal at Heartland. Angie's here, of course, and she's been instrumental in gathering some data for us. The beauty of our task force is that we have medical professional Mary Bender, pediatrician, is on that task force, along with Otella Perry, who's been a great resource to us. Mary emailed me today to say that she would be very much like to be at the next task force meeting. She's been almost at every single one. She hasn't missed much. And she's advocating for more time in school. She sees the safety structure of that. And quite frankly, I think our teachers in general, not 100%, but in general are feeling that sense of wanting to try to extend that day and do all of the work in person. So that's where we are now. We should be able to have a plan back to this board. I'm hoping by late in that first week in January, somewhere around the end of that week, and then we can either have a special meeting or we can wait until our next scheduled meeting. So, Angie, I don't know if you wanted to show some of that remote data or not. Are you ready to do that?
Yes, David, it is shared with you. And I
Okay.
just sent it to the board members. Oh, not Chris, that are here on the call, and a few that I could remember that aren't here, like Kristen.
Did you send it to our emails?
Yes, if you go into your drive, it was shared with you before break, so it's probably not right at the top of your email.
Yeah.
It's
actually,
called 12-20 remote. If you type that in, it should come right up.
Okay.
Because I can't imagine you have a lot. Oh, thanks, Mark.
Amy, I don't know if you want to address the chat comments while he's looking for that. There's a few questions there.
Go ahead. Amy, you can do that. Yep.
You're muted. Amy, you're muted.
Of course I am, because, yeah. So Katie had the question, the 3 cases of COVID that our schools had to respond to. Oh, I'm sorry, those were 3 cases of COVID that our schools had to respond to, not COVID cases that were transmitted in school, correct? I just want to clarify that many schools are having to respond to a community spread of COVID and not responding to actual COVID spread within our school communities. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Those were not contracted or transmitted in schools. Where that gets confusing, however, is that whether it's transmitted in schools or not, if it's transmitted, and then that student or that faculty member, or in one case, an administrator does contract, then you've got all that quarantining that goes on that needs to happen. We've been very fortunate. We have had very, very little quarantining that's had to go on a wide scale. When I talk to my colleagues around, okay, so I'm told there are about 30 students that are going to be returning to in-person mid-semester. When I talk to my colleagues around the southeast part of the state, what they're telling me is that that there are times when they have to send a fair number of students, fair number of staff home. We've been pretty good about that, I think, and part of it does have to do with with the plan for sure. Is there another question in the chat?
Not a question, but Bill Yates commented that Hartford K-5 are 5 days a week with shortened days.
Okay, yeah. And I think they go a little bit longer than we do, but we're looking at the Hartford K-5 model a little bit, because I don't know what time they get out, Bill. What do they get out at 1, I think, maybe?
Yeah, about that. It's not that much more. And
yeah.
they have a late arrival too for screening.
Yeah. Well, and we do too. My not argument, but my contention has been that when you go 5 days a week and you have a shortened day, you're doing better in terms of numbers of minutes of instruction than those schools that take every Friday off, or they're in on Monday, out on Tuesday, back in on Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday in, Wednesday, Thursday out, and they flip flop back and forth. I've done the math on all of those models, and our kids have much more face-to-face instruction time than the schools that are using those models. And our model is very similar to the K-5 model in Hartford. You're absolutely right, Bill. Christine, is Christine still on the line? Because Christine,
David, I think I can bring it up now.
yeah, well, I was going to say Christine shared it with her board last time. I just didn't know if one of you could do it. That's fine. It's hard to share and follow along. That's all.
There, I think I'm presenting now.
Let's see.
I just don't want to hang up my cell phone in case
No, that's okay.
my internet goes a little wonky.
And the presenting, it doesn't look like you're presenting yet.
Oh, okay. Gosh, I take some time off and I've forgotten how to do everything.
Yeah, now
there we go.
Now you're up and running. I think this might be helpful for everyone to see just a little bit of this.
So we submitted a survey to our staff and to parents the last day of the remote learning week, which was after Thanksgiving break, and that into the first few days of December. And so the first feedback I'll share with you is from our families. And this slide shows you who responded, so you know who the feedback is coming from. We had 198 responses, probably about 5% of those may be duplicated responses. It's a weird thing that happens with Google Forms. I mean, that I haven't been able to figure out. So if we had 6.6% from Albert Bridge, for 23.2% from Heartland, 26.8% from Weathersfield, and then 46% of respondents were from Windsor School. And also that if those numbers don't exactly add up, it's because they may have students at Windsor School and at Weathersfield, for example. And then this slide shows you the grade levels. It seems like we had quite a wide representation from K-8, and then at least in the 9-12, not as many parents, but still a even representation. And let me see. This question shows you that was in response to one or more children experience difficulty. We did hear that first day, November 30th, there was something happening with the internet, and it was very glitchy. So there were some comments made about that. And so but what's encouraging is that 50% of respondents said there were no issues. Then I asked, the question asked, what kinds of things did they find challenging? And of course, you can see we had a whole list of responses, but I just wanted to pull out the top 6, internet, Seesaw, Google Classroom, and then there were a lot of people in that list that said there were none. And this question, whoops, sorry about that. This question is asking, oh, I'm so sorry. If one or more of the children experience difficulty sticking to the schedule as assigned, and 49% said not at all. So yellow is not at all and red is somewhat. So about 75%, a little bit more than that, had a little difficulty or some difficulty, but not major difficulty with the schedule. This question was asking some of the feedback that we got in June was that parents were concerned about the amount of screen time that students were expected to be on online or doing assignments, especially for our younger students. Unfortunately, I don't have it broken down by who responded, how parents of students of different ages responded on this one, but you can see that The red represents a good balance between non-computer and computer-based activities. That's about 57%. Blue is not enough non-computer based activities. That's about 30%. So about 1/3 of our families are still looking for less computer-based activities. At least 1/3 of our families, if this is a representative sample, would appreciate more non-computer-based activities. And then this question was, did we meet your expectations? Blue is yes, red is somewhat, and the orange is no. And relative to your remote learning experience last spring, we were interested if they felt that it was a better overall experience than last spring, assuming that they had children in our system. Blue was much more challenging than last spring, so that's about 15%, and 20% said about the same, and about 58% said much better than last spring. That was very encouraging. Did you feel supported during the remote learning week to make it successful for your children? Blue indicates yes, and that's about 87%. There were many comments and regarding individual experiences, and there are more than I could summarize here, but the graphical data seem to capture the overall sentiments of our families and their responses. Are there any questions on the family feedback before I move on to staff feedback?
I have a question, Angie. It's Amy.
Sure.
On the challenging, let me see. So relative to your remote learning experience last spring, and it said much more challenging than last spring. Does that mean that the lessons themselves were more challenging, or they had more challenges trying to access the lessons?
I think given the responses earlier to the technology difficulties that people were having, I think this, and I can't say for sure because really you write a survey and you don't find out that maybe it wasn't as clear as it could have been until after you get the results back. But I think it's much more challenging because students were expected to show up. There were attendance requirements, there were work requirements. So I'm assuming, I would make the assumption that it was more challenging along those lines than along the technology. The expectations were more challenging.
Okay, great, thanks.
Amy, I think Heather had a question.
Heather?
I didn't know, is this like, while you're doing this, are community members are allowed to ask questions during this, or just board members?
If you had a question, when you have a question, you can raise your hand.
Okay.
And your hand is raised, so.
My question about this survey was the question, I think a question should have been asked about what were your children doing, or where were they during remote week? Because I think you would have gotten a lot of information about how children spent their remote week and how many different locations some of them were at. And so I think it might be important to ask that question as well, especially if you're going to do a survey for the upcoming remote week.
That's great feedback. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, and the other thing,
I know that there were some comments about that in terms of their, in the staff survey results, they talked about students being in different places, but to form a question that gets that specific feedback would probably be very helpful.
and Heather, you're also getting very close to really the essence of this remote question, and really it's around equity. I mean, it would be interesting if we could disaggregate this data, along economic lines, along two-parent working homes, across single-parent homes. I mean, none of those would you want to make any judgments about, but I bet you that there are certain categories of parents who struggle a lot more with remote instruction than other parents. And I think it's got to do with where those kids are located during that week, what kind of access they have to Wi-Fi. Is there somebody home that can help them? I think you're absolutely right. That's a critical part to all of this.
So I will continue with the staff results. So this slide just gives you a sense of who was responding. The blue area is content area or self-contained teachers. The red is our unified arts. So we had about 45% of respondents were content area teachers and 7.6% were unified arts. And then the rest are spread across special educators, paraprofessionals, school nurse, counselors, and administrator. Other are like our social emotional interventionists, our BCBAs, that sort of role. We had 144 responses, which is probably about 2/3 of our entire staff. Which schools? Again, 44% of respondents were at Windsor School, with 28% at Wethersfield, 24% at Heartland, about 10% from Albert Bridge, and 2% from Central Office. The grade levels were fairly evenly distributed, with our 912 being at 30 responses for 912 staff. So that is a good proportion of them. Did the amount of time provided for you to prepare for the week meet your needs? 46% responded mostly, and the blue represents not at all. That's about 12%. And 40% said somewhat. We have gotten some feedback from our union representation, union leadership, that preparing for remote week is far more challenging and time consuming than it is when they're preparing for in-person activities, especially for our youngest students. And that's why we adjusted the schedule the week before vacation to give teachers time for preparation. How did the schedule work for you in terms of ease of use to follow? We did have scheduling expectations for our teachers, and 70% said it mostly worked out, and then that red is about 24% said somewhat. Did the schedule work for you in terms of ease of use for students to follow? So this question is really asking what their perceptions were of how their students did with it. And again, mostly is the yellow, that's at 56%, and 32% were at somewhat. How did the materials you prepared or had access to meet your students' needs? This is the same scale, mostly is the yellow or orange, and that's at 70%, and then somewhat's at 20%. Relative to your remote learning experience last spring, how do you think this week went overall? And the yellow is much better than last spring, so that's about 56%. About the same, that's 23%, that's the red. And 16% said it didn't apply to them. So that might be our represent our paraprofessionals or our staff who do not actually prepare for instruction, remote learning instruction. Again, there were a lot of comments made that too many to summarize, but the graphical data gives you a good sense of what the overall experience was for our staff. Are there any questions?
Looks like we're good then. Angie, do you want to stop sharing?
I will, just a moment.
So the purpose for that is to just give you a sense that there is nothing perfect about the remote world. We know that. And that's why we feel it's important to limit the number of, certainly full weeks that we're remote. And we really have tried to limit those. And also to try to take care of that afternoon session where, as we all know, especially at the K-8 level, there is some struggle around remote access in that afternoon time, which is part of what's motivating us to think about an extended day that would, within the confines and terms of the contract, fulfill both the requirements for hours of instruction given to us by the AOE and the learning standards, and also the master agreement. I think we can bring a reasonable proposal to this board next month. The goal would be whatever change we make would start second semester, which I believe is September 25th or thereabouts. And I just know that there are a lot of stakeholders that we have to touch base with. One of the things we're thinking about is certainly another very, very quick survey to staff and to parents that might just pertain to extending the day. So that's it for me. If there are any other questions, I see Rebecca has her hand up. And Amy, I know you have to leave a little early tonight.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to leave at 7:30, but Rebecca has her hand, and then after that, it's Katie Burke. I see that you have your hand raised.
David, I just wanted to know if there was any specific reasons why 30 families have requested that their children return to school. I know you had pointed out that you're aware that there are many issues why some students may be struggling in the remote environment. So I'm just wondering, did you get specific reasons on why these families are returning the kids, the students back to school?
Yeah.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, Andy. Sure.
So the survey didn't ask them to tell us their reasons why. Anecdotal, and that's 30 students, not 30 families. So some of those families have multiple children, just so you know. But some of those families have been waiting since October to get back into classrooms because there was not space for their students to return. I think thinking about that list of students, some of them it was just not a great fit for their kiddo with remote learning. And for others, I think that their situation has changed, and it makes more sense for their students to be back to in person. I don't know, Christine is here if she wants to respond at all for the Heartland families, because many of them have also reached out to the principals.
Oh, I think exactly what you said, Angie. Some situations have changed, and I think some parents wanted to see how it went the first semester as well, and get a sense of, what school would be like. But we're really excited. I think Heartland has 14 kids coming back, so we're excited to have them back in the building.
And I also think, Rebecca, much like you've heard on this call tonight, I think the parents are recognizing that that it is it's a safe place to be, and that I think they were worried at the beginning of the year, much like our teachers were incredibly worried at the beginning of the year. So I think it's just a different level of comfort, and I think that's a tribute to the principals and to the staff and to the work that's gone on in preparing this. And by the way, I don't want to take away from our teachers who have been teaching completely remote instruction. Angie operates that remote school. Basically, she's the principal of the remote school. She meets with those teachers on a weekly basis, and they have been working their tails off. And I also want to give some shout out to Katie Ahern, who's on this call. Katie's our support services director, handles our special education students, and it is an enormous amount of work in terms of providing schedules that both take care of those 100% remote kids and that morning hybrid model and afternoon wind time model. So when we make this shift in January, we also have to think about those kids, because right now, just as an example, I will tell you that some of our support staff, when we dismiss at 12:30, they go over to the high school side and they help with some of those remote high school classes in the afternoon. So Katie's got a little bit of juggling to do to make sure that all kids have adequate support when we go to that full day. And it's just a lot of moving pieces. And I think we'll work it out. I know we'll work it out. But we've just got to get all those pieces operating in the right direction.
Okay, Katie, and then Jessica.
I just could not agree more with David. You just said that, I think that people started out in a really different place than a lot of them are now. And I think that if you're before this next version of the plan comes through, maybe that's a valuable question to ask families, because I think a lot of parents were fearful. I think a lot of educators were fearful. And I wouldn't say that everybody's feeling differently, but I think a lot of people are. One of the things that I would be really, one of the things that I would recommend is that we be really careful when we use verbiage like pods. I think essentially the whole purpose of a pod initially when we went back to school was so that we could facilitate some sort of contact tracing if we did have an outbreak. And essentially now for the elementary school kids, the classroom is the pod. And so that classroom just becomes the group of kids that stays together. The longer we can keep these kids together in school, which we've said is the safest place for them, the better we can cut down on all of that inter-community mixing that we're having to do. It feels a little like we're kind of putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding artery when we're trying to accommodate the half-day model, which again, I think was an awesome transition to back to school, in the time of a pandemic. But I worry now, not worry, I think reflecting on where we are now, given the science, this model doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. But I'm just a simple country nurse.
Yeah.
And I want to continue to collaborate and work together to move forward to get more of our kids in the buildings in a way that respects where everybody's at.
Can I just ask for clarification, Katie? Were you saying you're not sure the pod model is necessarily a good long-term option? Is that what you were alluding to, or were you just saying the time in school needs to continue to be extended?
I think the time in school needs to continue to be extended, and we can't let the notion of a pod become a barrier to that goal. So I think pods become a little more important in middle school, high school, where you have kids, moving around in different classes, where spread is at a heightened risk. But in the elementary school, I don't think we should let the notion of a pod prohibit kids from coming back to school.
Yeah. It's interesting too, not to birdwalk too much on this one, Katie, but we have found some tangential benefits to the pods, which we didn't. Originally, they were for contact tracing and they were for safety. But what we found is about an 80% reduction in office referrals. We've had no harassment, bullying, or hazing complaints this year. That's nothing short of a miracle. I think when you build pods and you build families and you get adults wrapped around kids, you get a lot of side benefits you didn't think you were going to get. And there's a lot of research out there too about organizing kids in pods and houses. And so I think we're going to pursue this a little bit and make sure it's good for kids and good for staff. But we've seen so many benefits from that model. We're not quick to let it go quickly, if you know what I mean.
Jessica.
Could you speak a little bit to, you said back in the beginning when you were talking about extending the day and how to give teachers their planning, that it would be breaking the pause to have kids go out to specials. So can you speak to that a little bit? Like, I'm not sure that I follow that unless you're considering special teachers to not be included in the pod.
Yeah, no, right now, Jessica, the special teachers are included in the pods. And again, not all schools have the same number of special teachers. But, under the old system, as you know, right, what you do is you'd have a first grade class and Monday morning they'd have art. And then the art teacher would have the first grade. And then next block might have the sixth grade. Then the next block might have the fourth grade. That's what we've done away with. We've integrated those specials teachers into those pods. And because of the number of kids we're serving, including the 30 more that are going to join us on the 25th, we are not advocating right now for going back to a traditional schedule where kids go out to phys ed or go out to art or go out to music. Some schools have done that, usually with smaller numbers than the numbers we're working with, but most schools that are doing that are not in the same configuration that we've been in. I don't know if that answers it, Jessica, but we'll keep those. So for right now, what's happening in let's say in pod A, maybe that's a K1 pod or a first grade pod. The art teacher is with that pod for say 3 weeks or 6 weeks, and then she'll move to another pod for the next 6 weeks. And what they'll do during that time, let's say it's the art teacher, they'll integrate a fair amount of art into the work that they're doing. So those kids get that art in a very practical and project-based manner. And the feedback from the teachers, including the special teachers, has been very positive. I mean, not 100%, but it seems like it's working. And so we want to try to preserve a little of that as we move into second semester.
Yeah, I mean, like I can see the benefits of that, of having that kind of like integrated, more like interdisciplinary. But I guess, like Katie was saying, to kind of stick with that model to stick with the pod system, but that then prevents the hours that kids can be in school.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I don't know that is what that is something that it would be interesting to see what parents thought about that, if they would, how they would weigh that against having their kids in school more hours.
Well, I think that's a good point. I think that's a really good point. And that's part of what, that's part of the final decision making that goes on, in the next a couple of weeks here is what's, and by the way, I do think we can extend the day. I really do. Can we do a full day in that model? I don't think we can do a full day. I don't think we can go back to the old schedule that we were at, say, last year when we all went out. But I think we can extend the day and preserve a lot of what we're finding is positive behaviorally, emotionally, academically for our kids. We just went through we use Track My Progress as a tool to measure student progress, and we did the fall testing. We have not done the winter testing yet, right, Christine or Angie?
We do when we return, David, to in person.
It's in the middle of January.
Okay, we're gonna do it in the middle of January. Okay, but again, and I know this is a big fear on a part of parents and educators as well, is how much are our kids regressing, right? But on that initial Track My Progress, and that's not a perfect instrument. No instrument is perfect. It looks like a lot of our kids are really holding their own. So that's the other part of this, right? Is how do we do this and do it well? But this board and this staff has been talking about integrating instruction for a long time anyway, and we've been advocates for trying to get away from sort of these isolated art experience and the isolated foreign language experience and the isolated PE experience. I mean, that's the way schools were set up, many years ago, but we are really trying to head toward a much more progressive, project-based curriculum. And our teachers, part of it because they've had to do it this fall, but they're starting to really embrace that, and they like it, and it's working for our kids. And we were able to, because of those ratios, when you've got 2 teachers in a room with 12 kids, you can get them outside, bring them back outside, and it's safe, and it's dynamic. I think it's dynamic. I watched a lot over the fall. Yep.
Elizabeth had a question.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
For the comment. I don't think correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this board has any desire whatsoever to go to a day on, day off, or Wednesdays off and Fridays off, but the rest being full days. I've never heard anybody on the board express that was a good idea. So we're either half days building onto one end or the other, or not. We're not going to go one day on, one day off, just to clarify.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's exactly right. And what we're trying to do is really the latter of what you just said, right? That we're trying to either take the beginning of the day, as Jessica said, we've gotten these health checks down pat, the end of the day, where we think we can get more in-person instruction and more intervention, and more work in person, and just trying to get a longer, healthier day, but at the same time, making sure that we stay within the confines of the master agreement, and that we also can mitigate the anxiety of our staff. And I think that somebody said that earlier, that that's a critical piece to this, to make sure they feel supported. And because it's one thing to say that our schools are safe, and I believe they are, but it's another thing to be in there every day and to be trying to keep 10 kids masked and distanced all day. It's exhausting.
David, Bill, respectfully, we've got to move on from this.
Yeah.
On this subject for almost 30 minutes. And
Yeah, yes.
And then there's no real discussion here.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I think we can move on, and I would like to thank all the public who joined us and shared their perspective. I think it's good to have parents voice their opinion and their concern as well. I think I'm looking at an old agenda.
I can pull the agenda up.
Thank you.
Again, the reason why I was feeling comfortable. I'm sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth.
It's
policy. Okay, I found it again.
Bill, just a couple of things for a point of clarification. The date that was mentioned earlier, second semester is January 25th. It was missaid. And Heather, who spoke earlier, is asking you, saying, do you still have a question for her before you move on?
Oh, yes. Heather, just can you give me an example of schools that are going at least K5, K6 all day?
Yep. Bradford, Vermont is going. Rutland is going. Hartford is going, and they are their school time is a little bit shortened, but not too many. There's a couple schools up in the Burlington area that are as well going, and that's just Vermont schools. I know of plenty of schools from where other states that are going full time.
Yeah, I know Claremont is all in right now.
Yep.
So thank you.
You're welcome.
Open up policy review audit cycle.
Yeah, this is one, I know that Lori instigated this, I think with the policy subcommittee. I think Lori sent out something that said that, first of all, that there were some policies at the VSBA that we might need to take another look at, but then we were talking more about how do we get on a regular cycle of policy review now that we've got our policies at the SU level.
It actually comes from Scott, and Scott talking about some of the policies when we were looking at the electronic media, social media policy. Scott took the time to look through all the VSBA policies and saw a bunch that we had not adopted. And we know from when Nikki and I did the policy once over when we adopted all the SU-wide policies that we haven't gone back to. We only looked at how far back was it, Nikki? Like 10 years old and newer. We've always known that we've had a list that needed to be touched again because they're supposed to be touched once every 3 years anyway, but we haven't, I think what we were going to talk about was returning to that, but also the piece where Laurie was supposed to come in was to look at the VSBA site and see what we hadn't ever looked at, tipped off by Scott.
So yeah, to reiterate what Elizabeth said is that when has it been like 2 or 3 years now? When we went through the massive epic list of policies that we had, we decided to can or extensively overhaul everything that was over 10 years old. we kind of kept everything that was under 10 years old and readopted it. And so the whole point is to create kind of a cycle where every 6 months we review a certain number of policies, or the oldest policies, to make sure that they're still valid and appropriate. So I think that's where this comes from. That being said, I think a lot of us are overwhelmed right now. So that's my piece.
One question that I have is and maybe someone can remind me. I know the Ascutney board, it was really quite simple because all the policies of Windsor and Albert Bridge became non-existent because those two were non-existent. Then we have Weathersfield and Heartland.
We all did it. We all did it at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, everybody made their own local policies extinct. You all had that vote, you did that, and then we voted to basically have the supervisory union policies apply to all 3 districts. I think Lori, I mean, the advantage we've got here is that Lori, and I think she's already begun some of this work, she's incredibly organized at this type of work. I think it's just that somebody with some institutional memory, probably not me, but I could certainly help, going back over those original lists. I know, Nikki, you had some lists, that were pretty, and just have an opportunity to maybe look at those with Lori, then let her go to the VSBA site, which again, I think she's already done some of this, and then sort of set up, okay, what would be the first 3 to 6 policies we should be reviewing, revising, and readopting. Is that what I'm hearing, or am I off base here?
Yeah, David, I think the easiest, I'm happy to meet with Lori and go back through, but I think what I would do is VSBA has recently rewritten a lot of their policies.
That's
I would
correct.
go through our policies, starting with our oldest, and compare the adopted date to the VSBA date. And I think Lori's capable of doing that on her own, and just pick, a pile that we should revisit. Because if our adopted date is earlier than the current VSBA date, then ours is older and not.
I think most of our policies are VSBA policies, so they should be pretty easy to put. And I know that Lori knows how to do the side-by-side document thing where you can compare.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Compare drafts. So I don't think it'd be that hard to do. I think we should go back to 10 years ago and do what you were suggesting, Nikki, but I also think we should also start with some of the VSBA policies that have been drafted very recently, like in the last 3 months, and just adopt them, or, not flat out adopt them, but
put them in our format. Yeah.
I also think that, I'd be willing to pitch in as well, because I know that Nicole and Elizabeth really put in an abundant amount of time last time. And I know that policy burnout is a real thing. It does happen. So
it does.
So maybe we could create a group of volunteers to do just quick reading and then data setup.
Let me just ask a clarifying question here, because when I hear Elizabeth say go back 10 years, what was it 2 summers ago when we adopted basically everything pretty fresh? I guess, are there some policies, and I don't have it right up in front of me, obviously, are there some policies on our current website that are active policies for the SU that go back 10 years?
Yes, there are. And we are supposed to be looking at them every 3 years. 3 years is supposed to be the life of a policy.
Okay, so
so it's been almost 3 years. In June, it'll be 3 years since we adopted all of the policies. So
yeah, right.
All of them. But I think we could, I mean, they're not, it's different from having, Nikki and I weeded out all of it was kind of fun weeding out some of them, like the airborne illness policy we ditched because we laughed about it because we didn't need it anymore. And look at us now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Anyway.
So I'd like to make a brainstorming suggestion here, saying in June it's 3 years. And COVID really sort of puts a damper on a lot of things. Maybe it might be some good summer work for some of the board members to tackle this rereading and analyzing 3-year-old policies to the new VSBA policies.
I agree, but I also think that, I mean, because we're on all of the SBA policies right now, it'll be a lot faster going with adopting or re-upping the policies. Where, I mean, we had some of the, we had to weed through like all of the alcohol policies and substance abuse, and there were like, I think there were 12 of them altogether, and figure out what parts of one we needed to keep. We don't need to do any of that. It's all there. We just need to read through it and re-up it. So we're not having to create anything or edit anything. We're just looking to see whether it fits our supervisory union.
Yeah. I'm looking.
Add in a little something that was. I just looked at 3 of them from the WSSU. For Elizabeth's benefit, we'll say WSSU's policy book, and it was late July 19. I don't think we so let's not beat ourselves up too much. It seems like 3 years ago, but it was
that's exactly right.
The summer before this last summer that we adopted them so our administrators could head into the new school year with our new policies. And yeah, I'd be willing to be part of that, research team when that came around with some, committee direction as to, and just get that responsibility divvied up. I do part of it.
Thank you, Scott.
There was a little bit of broadening of the discussion here. I whenever we do policies, we frequently come to the procedure page at the end, and it's always been my understanding that that's not our spot to work. And we talked about that a little bit actually informally before this meeting started, and I'd like some clarification on that, at some point, maybe in the superintendent's report in the next couple months.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Scott. And I also pulled up 3 randomly as we were discussing, and I agree with what Scott just said. It looks like all of the revision adoptions happened July of 2019. That, so that's what's this summer's 21. Yeah, so it's 2 years, not 3 years, but that's still good. I guess what we're talking about in terms of, we're talking about where were those policies prior to that revision adoption, right? Like, for example, if I'm looking at the acceptable use policy, looks like it was initially adopted in 2011. All we did was we readopted that on 7/1/2019 for all of us. What you're saying is the work would be to look at that against what might be a reasonable, acceptable use policy now, or a reasonable class size policy now, based on, again, VSBA, one of the things they do incredibly well, and you pay a lot of money for it, is they come up with the best legally researched policies, templates. And so I don't see any reason to pull away from that model. I just think it's a matter of, and I think Lori could matrix this out pretty simply, going back to the ones that are the earliest. And by the earliest, I mean the original adoption, right? 2011, 2010, 2015. She could line that up, I think. And then she could also look at what are some of the policies. I don't think there's a ton of them, but there are some that the VSBA has written just in the last couple of years since we did these. And I think we could easily get a matrix together. The question then is, how do you want to review those? Bill suggested, I know last time we did a summer committee to take a look at that. We could do 4 or 5 each meeting, but policy is a lot of work. And Bill is right. You can get policy brain drain.
Nikki, you had a question?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say is I just went to the VSBA website, and they make this really easy for us. They have a list of 6 policies that are brand new, some of which we've already adopted. They have a list of 6 policies that have been recently changed, and they have a list of policies that have been recently removed. So I really think that the fastest way to move forward would be for Lori to write a list of what we have and compare that date to the date on the VSBA. The VSBA made part of that list really handy for us, so we can just start with the list that they already gave us of what we should do, and then we can move on from there. I think having a committee to review them, or 2 people taking, what we did before is 2 people took each policy on the board, so that Elizabeth and I didn't completely drown in policies. So that might be another idea.
That's a good way to do it too. Yeah. But I think Lori has to do the initial work and get that matrixed out. And I think that's easy to do. And I hadn't looked at that VSBA site in a while, but as I recall, they, as you said, Nikki, they make it pretty simple. And I think she's really good at that organizational work. She'll do this, she can get that matrixed out, and then we can decide. And I agree with Elizabeth. Maybe we go back. Certainly we start with the newest ones they've adopted that we haven't even looked at. I think we start with that, and then going back to our earliest policies that may have been changed by them. And I think Lori, to answer your question, Bill, Lori Brown is who I'm talking about. She's my administrative assistant, and this is something she is absolutely, this is one of her strengths. She'll tackle this, and I can talk with her tomorrow. I think she may be taking this week off, but I'll certainly email her and give her the heads up based on this conversation. And then we can maybe come up with a hard plan at our next meeting. I mean, she could probably have the matrix for us by our next meeting. Then we could come up with a plan as to who's going to take what part of that.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So let's revisit this next meeting. As I start to bleed on my head, I don't know what happened.
We can't see if that's any help.
That finishes out the agenda, I think.
I think we're there.
Okay.
I know there's some people want to stick around for a little while, so it's not bad if we end early.
Yeah, and I'm David. I'll send an email out. I think it's getting close to time for the negotiation committee to have a short chat.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I saw Scott's hand go up. We didn't make a formal change to the agenda, but I wonder, Scott and Bill, do you think it would be wise to have the supervisory union board ratify the contract for next year? We can go over those changes pretty quickly, or do you want to save that for the next meeting?
It wasn't warned.
It wasn't warned. Let's save it for the next meeting.
Yeah, we can do it.
Okay. So I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Did you want to look at agenda for the next meeting?
Oh, that wasn't on the agenda. Okay. While we do, so the agenda, we would have to have
COVID plan, second semester COVID plan.
Yeah. And
anti-racism.
Anti-racism.
And policy development, just in general, I think should be back on.
And contract.
And ratify master agreement, right? The 2021 master agreement. I'm trying to look at the calendar here. When is our next meeting?
The last Monday would be the 25th.
25th.
Okay, the 25th.
Stephen, that's the semester change, so
I'm thinking that's too late.
yeah, agreed.
So I would like to back that up to the 18th. Oh, that's Martin Luther King Day.
Martin Luther King Day.
Is it possible to do a Tuesday?
We could do the 19th.
Yeah.
Does that work for everybody?
I don't have to be there, but I'll.
Here's a question. Do most of our individual boards meet prior to that?
Yeah, they do. They meet the 11th, the 12th, and for some reason I don't have Mount Scottney in here, but I think Mount Scottney. What did we decide on for Mount Scottney, Elizabeth? Do you remember? I don't know why I don't have Mount Scottney in here. I've got Heartland on the 11th, and I've got Weathersfield on the 12th.
And so here's my thought, is that if we get the presentation and have discussion in the individual board meetings, can we either have a simple meeting, or if there's no discussion, I can't remember. Are we allowed to approve something with no discussion?
Well, you don't have to have a discussion, but you would need a meeting on something like this.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to remember. Thank you, Elizabeth.
You have to have. I think you have to have at least one discussion.
Elizabeth, do you know when we put the Mount Scottney board meeting for next month?
I believe it's the 13th, Wednesday the 13th.
Okay.
Excuse me, is Nikki asking about policy timeline?
No, I'm asking about rules, about voting rules.
Okay.
So am I correct that the issue is to be able to discuss the school day before the semester changes?
Correct.
Angie, is that right? Okay. So that would be what, Tuesday the 19th is what we're talking about? Or is Nikki, is your idea is just to have a short meeting after all the other boards meet and discuss this?
Yeah, that was my idea, was that if we could have all of the discussion happen in the individual board meetings. I mean, so my personal opinion is that as a board member, I'm not going to override the recommendations of the task force for the school, unless it's crazy. And so I think hearing about it in our individual meetings and being able to ask questions, and then all of the board members come to an SU meeting for a quick vote. And I'm just trying to.
Well, I
meetings have.
Right. I know the more meetings, the worse, but I agree with you in that I like the idea, because I agree with you that, the school day affects different districts differently. For some of the communication I've gotten from parents, the most obvious differences, of course, Heartland and, Weathersfield are sending schools. So their school day is affected by not Windsor High School, but other high schools. So I agree with you. Most of the discussion really should be done in the individual boards, and then have the individual boards come in and only discuss or report what their board said, and then we can kind of come up with a recommendation or a decision.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Bill. And I'm going to trust that Elizabeth is right on that Mount Scottney date, the 13th. So that would mean the 11th for Heartland. Going to be a busy week. The 12th would be Weathersfield, and the 13th would be Mount Scottney. So all three boards would have been able to vet that mid-semester schedule, and then we could simply ratify it at the SU level that following week. I would say on the 19th, if that's okay with everybody. Elizabeth, you can't make it on the 19th. Is that what you said?
But no, I can't, but you really don't need me.
No, as long as you can get a quorum.
Scott's got his hand raised and so does Christine.
Yeah, I can't, for some reason, I can't see that. It doesn't pop up on. Okay, Scott, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to defer to Christine, but here I go, so I'm going to do it. So the reason I was trying to clarify with Nikki, because when I talked to Sue Siglowski months and months ago now about policy, it was clear from her help with me with the actual laws that something needs like that, like a policy, or perhaps even this policy-esque move that we're talking about, the length of the actual student day, needs to be warned. The public needs to see that at least 10 days, perhaps 2 weeks ahead of that. So, and the problem with our discussion is that we're talking about seeing it locally and voting for SU, and we're not a unified board. So we need to at least warn, as we're discussing it locally, it would need to be warned with, and not just an agenda, but perhaps even an idea, a document, something for this public to see like 10 days ahead of the SU meeting when we're going to vote on it, even if we continue to discuss it locally, would be my interpretation.
Yeah, I think what you might be doing, Scott, possibly is confusing policy with the infrastructure. In other words, we're talking about a schedule, that won't be a policy. That'll be really a schedule that the administrative team is going to present to this board, that'll be more around a procedure essentially, it's a schedule. So I don't think it needs a 10-day warning. I think it'll be vetted well by the administrative team. It'll be warned certainly on those local agendas. And then the reason the supervisory union board has to approve it is that the state board, right? Actually the state board authorized individual school districts to establish their school day for COVID. But then we had a large discussion where we said to each other, yeah, it could be vetted at the local district, but it should be approved at the supervisory union district. You might remember this conversation back in August, because we have a unified master agreement and we can't have one schedule in Wethersfield. And I know this was mentioned tonight by one of the people at the meeting, and one schedule at Heartland and one schedule at Windsor. That's simply not going to work. We would have multiple grievances if the schedule looked different at Wethersfield than it did at Wethersfield or at Heartland. So again, I don't think this
even if I just want to reiterate David's point, even if every schedule was appropriate within the master agreement, if they were different, that would be grievable.
That would be grievable, because especially now that we have a unified school day. But I think more to Scott's point, I think, Scott, when we start the policy work, that's when those things need, they need 2 or 3 readings, they need the 10-day warning, they need all of that stuff, but not the schedule we're going to bring to you. I think that can be vetted very simply. It should be on the agenda, much like approving the master agreement. But
my point is clearer than, or maybe simpler than that. I don't want to play fast and loose with this being really a disjointed district. I don't want to pretend that we're a unified district. And so someone who's interested in what goes on at the SU board doesn't know about the goings on perhaps at the local board. They may or may not be paying attention to that. So
I hear you.
Yeah. And Scott,
This is
Scott, I have to say, I agree with you. And that's why I think Nikki's point is so important, is to have those individual districts discuss how the schedule will affect them. And have those discussions come back to the SU board and have us all consider the fact that we are not a single district. We are an SU, but different school districts are affected differently by this choice. So I guess I'm agreeing. Nikki, you had something else?
I think Christine is first. But I guess you go, Christine.
Well, I guess my big ask would be the sooner we can make this decision, the better, because there's a lot of planning that has to go into it. And so, meeting on the 19th as a board to approve it doesn't leave us a lot of time to adjust schedules and let parents know. So I guess my ask would be the sooner the better. And our hope is to extend the day if we're going to on the 25th when the second semester begins. That just seems like an appropriate time to do it. So that's all.
So I raised my hand to throw a wrinkle into this whole discussion. We approved a policy that says that David implements the rules and procedures for options for schooling. So technically, didn't we remove our need to approve the schedule?
Did that go for the entire year or just the semester?
We're under an emergency order, and we approved something different for this period.
You mean for second semester or for this period we're in now?
For the time that we're under the emergency order from the governor.
Right, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the modes of instruction during the state of emergency due to the COVID pandemic, which states that David has it says the board delegates authority to the superintendent to develop and implement rules and procedures addressing the following. And it lists.
I don't really remember approving that. I think there were some reservations about.
I think
it's in our policies.
I don't know what to say about that.
I pulled it off of our policies. I think that's what we said, that we'd like to see it. But I do think that we gave David the authority to run away with it.
It was a long and healthy discussion, but you did. And what I'm saying, though, is that out of courtesy to the SU board, and it could be done at the local boards too, we felt that because this was going to be a fairly major change, we wanted to at least make everybody aware of what that was going to be. But I mean, I do remember, what I couldn't remember, Nikki, was whether we passed that policy for the semester or for the whole year. But it sounds like it doesn't have that caveat in there, right?
I thought it was for while we were under the emergency order from the governor.
Right, which we are still.
And really, I think it's the difference between, I mean, I think that our role is in or out, right? Off or on. And then David's role, like he has been doing, is, calling a week remote or, the other part.
Right.
Which we haven't had any. I mean.
Well, I think Elizabeth answered the biggest question tonight, and I heard her say this pretty emphatically. We have no intention as an administrative team, nor do I think any of our board members have any intention of bringing into play any kind of an AB day or a Monday, Tuesday in, Wednesday out, 4 days in, Friday off. No. What we're really talking about is extending the day, maybe a little bit at the beginning, some at the end, so that we're getting about an extra hour in, so that all of the instruction can be done in person for those kids who are in person. So it's not, there's a lot of planning that goes into that, by the way, as Christine said, but that's the proposal. And I think that what we'd like to do is bring more of the specifics to those local boards. And then I think it could be as simple as an FYI. So maybe the 25th is okay. I don't know.
That's what I'm thinking. I think it should be discussed, but I don't think that we technically have to vote on it because we've already, I think it should be discussed, and I think we should provide feedback, but we gave the authority to David. Bill, it's the modes of instruction during the state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's a VSBA rule or VSBA policy. And I guess the way I read it, it says that options for in-person, remote, and hybrid learning by grade level with an emphasis on ensuring in-person instruction for students in the primary grades. And we gave David the authority to develop and implement rules and procedures with respect to that. So to me, that tells me that we gave David the authority to extend or shorten the school day based on the options for when we were in person or remote or hybrid.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I remember this discussion. It was a very healthy discussion. And we did at least an hour and a half on this with some rather vocal school board members who felt it should be local decision, who felt somebody else should make the decision. Yeah, I remember this, and I didn't realize we had actually pushed it into policy, but you're absolutely right. And then I was going to give a monthly status report to the board. So,
which you are,
which I am, and I'm going to do that on the 25th. I think you're right. I think that we can go over the plan at the local individual districts, because also that's where you're going to hear from teachers, you're going to hear from parents, because you're going to have some parents that think we should go right till the end of the day. You're going to have some teachers that don't think we should extend at all. So that's the job of that's why the administration gets paid the big bucks. We'll sort all that out. And as long as we have the general consensus of this board, even tonight, that we have no intentions of going to an AB day, a 2-on, a 4-day, because that's the other way we could get planning time in for teachers. We could go 4 full days and take Friday off. There are districts that are doing that right now. That's the Woodstock model, a matter of fact. When they say they're in 5 full days, no, they're in 4 full days, and then they have a remote day on Friday. But we're not going to do that. We don't want to do that, and none of you want to do that. So we want to just extend the day. And that's going to take some work, like Christine said.
To clarify, that policy says for elementary or primary schools.
I'm looking at that now.
No, I don't know. I thought I heard
No,
you.
it doesn't. I don't see anything about primary schools.
No. And by the way, right now, there's no plan to change the high school schedule. That would entail, that's more, there's so much more entailed to do, that's entailed in that.
I guess the way I read this is that we don't need to have a meeting on the 19th and that we have a healthy discussion in our individual boards.
Yeah, because it said this policy shall be in effect for the duration of the state of emergency. That's what I couldn't remember, whether we had shortened the timeline of that. But no, it says the policy shall be in effect during the duration of the state of emergency. We are still in that state of emergency. And local districts are given the authority to have remote days, in-person days. So I think you're right. I think we're okay. We need a decision by the.
I think Wendy raised a point that the state of emergency currently expires on January 15th. I think most of us are under the assumption that it'll be extended again, but we will need to pull together an emergency meeting.
Yeah, if it doesn't, right.
If it goes away that quickly, maybe we just go to a full school day and we'll be done.
Yeah, good luck.
Okay, so reading it over, I as usual, I have to agree with Nikki. It's exactly what it says. As long as we're in a state of emergency, then the board really doesn't vote on it. I think it's still a great idea that the local boards talk about it, and then we get a update on the 25th.
No, I think that's perfect. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that fulfills Christine's really good point that voting on it on the 19th doesn't give enough time to actually implement the plans. By the time the 19th comes, it's really too late to present a new plan to administration and staff.
Yeah, I think that's why we did it this way, because we felt that any major changes would require the kind of planning Christine's talking about. Matter of fact, the administrative team is meeting this week because we've got to get prepared to make this move with the union and with the staff next week, the week of the 4th. And then we've got to get into high gear around the details of the plan. There's transportation issues, there's para and support staff issues, there are some contractual issues, but we've got to get all that worked out. I think we're going to be okay, but I'm glad you found that policy, Nikki. And that it does go for the whole year, or as long as the state of emergency is in effect.
Yep.
Okay.
Brian, that's a good point. And I local boards are required to take a lot of time to discuss this, because it really is up to the admin. So let me quickly review what I have so far for the 25th. Anti-racism review, just sort of a quick report on policy, on continuing with the discussion of the plans, contract ratification, and then instead of voting on, I put school day review. Is there anything I'm missing?
I would just be more generic and call that a COVID update, including the second semester plan, because there may be more details to share.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And Nikki and who's our chair in whether Anne Marie? Is Anne Marie still on the line?
Yeah, she's here. She's
Okay.
Brian today.
Yeah, we have to make sure that on the agenda for the 13th, 14th, and 15th, I've got those right dates. We have both second semester update on the COVID plan and, well, Heartland already did it, but Weathersfield and Montescutney have to ratify the contract on those. So we have to get that on the agenda. So we'll be good. I think you've got it, Bill, and I think that's a full night.
Wait, I got one more.
Oh.
And I need to, I'm mainly putting this in the minutes so it is not just in my head. And so we can decide if it needs to be an agenda item or not. But there's a lot of discussion, and Elizabeth may have more insight, maybe not now, but in a few days. So I got a phone call from our town clerk trying to figure out how budget voting was going to happen this year. And so right now in Heartland, there's a talk of delaying town meeting until later in the year. And so he was really concerned, because we're a supervisory union, that we all vote in the same way. And so I will check in with, so it sounds like Weathersfield's in a similar boat. So I think that the board chairs kind of need to be in touch, and it's helpful that Amy's a clerk. But I think we all need to stay coordinated on the voting pattern for our upcoming budgets.
Do you think we should have an executive committee meeting of the board chairs in the next couple of weeks Elizabeth, you start what, next week in Montpelier?
I've been, for the last 45 days, I put in no fewer than 12 hours every single day except for Christmas Day. That's the only day that it hasn't been. So I was just going to say that I can track that down for you. I don't think that that's been, I know that they have talked about, their very first act has to do with town meeting, like an hour after we're
live,
and we're supposed to talk about the rules, and then the first act is going to be about town meeting day. And I know that they've talked about like the whole, I think I mentioned this before, that the whole purpose is to provide more options, not pared down options, They're trying to make sure that people do not have remote town meetings. They want to stray away from that. And they want to ensure that towns that have traditional town meeting days are able to continue to do that and don't lose that in the course of all of this. So that's what they're going for. They have provisions to extend terms until it's possible to, the law will cover the extension of terms until it's possible to have a town meeting. And so the law is supposed to, stretch things out, not constrict them.
That's awesome. And and I hadn't thought about this. Our clerk had called me to say that he thought that we should make sure that the 4 towns are all on a similar page. Because he thought that since the supervisory union budget is included within the town budgets, that it wouldn't be fair if one town was voting, like if one town mailed ballots to all of their taxpayers and a different town didn't mail ballots. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that I will follow up on that tomorw. And
I'm not asking you to do anything. And we'll wait until we hear information.
I actually have a meeting about this kind of thing, tangentially tomorrow, and I can easily bring it up. So,
okay, but don't do anything extra for us. We'll figure it out.
No, it's no problem at all to follow up.
And I noticed that Anne Marie typed into the chat, because Anne Marie's in Wethersfield, that the Wethersfield Select Board has this on their agenda Monday night. So the other thing we've got to be careful of, and this may be more for Anne Marie than any of us, but all of us, we have to make sure that no one of our towns goes rogue on this either. That they keep us in the loop, they keep us well informed, and that we're going to advocate for some uniformity across the SU as we at least go about our school budgeting, right? I mean, I think that's critical, because remember, a lot of us have a different town meeting than we have a school meeting. Those are like two separate meetings, sometimes on and around the same day. But I think we just got to make sure we're all lined up with this. So
as such, I assume that local boards have budgets next meeting. It's going to be a long night. So is that the select board, Anne Marie, or is that the school board that you're talking about? Because I'm almost inclined to say that it would school boards. Okay. Before select boards decide what form they're going to use, maybe it would be a good idea for our supervisory union board to come out with a statement saying, we strongly advise you to blah, so that we can, and here's why. Because if we don't, then they won't think that we are unified in this. So it's a problem. Windsor has one form already. They've already decided on one form, and that form is not the same as West Windsor or Heartland or Wethersfield. So I don't know how. I will make it a priority to track this answer down tomorrow, and I'll let you all know what it is.
yeah, and then I have no problem if you want me to, or if you want to do it, that's fine. But I have no problem getting to all the town managers, right? And it's really not 4; it's 3 districts that we have to worry about. But you're right; there are 4 towns for town meetings. But I'd be glad to get to them and let them know that it's at least our desire to keep the school portion, if not the town portions, synchronized somehow. So, but Elizabeth, maybe you and I can touch base at some point after you've.
Yeah, let me get the answer first.
Searched it out. Okay.
Well, and I think Amy is really in the loop because she's the clerk in Windsor.
That's why it's helpful. Yeah.
And I know our clerk called me and I said, call Amy. So I said, I understand everything you're talking about. Call Amy and figure out what they're doing. So
Elizabeth, point of clarification. I see Rebecca's got her hand up too. When you say Windsor's already, did you say Windsor's already decided something?
Yeah, they're going all mail-in ballots
And all remote for town meetings?
and all remote for town meeting.
Okay. Do you think,
No, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. You'd have to ask Amy about that. I don't know.
but they're going all mail-in ballots
They're
for,
going on ballots. I know that. Well, they already have their ballots on a separate day, right? I think they're planning to have their meeting on Monday night as they usually do, because they usually have so few people turn up for that meeting.
right.
They're pretty safe being in the auditorium.
Yeah. And by mail-in ballots, did you mean, because my understanding is on those mail-in ballots, that those mail-in ballots, would they include a vote on the school budget for the Mount Scottney School District?
That you're going to ask Amy about.
Okay. Okay. All right. I'll let you chase it then. And yeah, because it sounds like Windsor might have gotten out a little ahead of us too. I'm not knocking that.
So I will find out the answer to the what if supervisory union budget question.
Okay.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And if Bill, it sounds like we should put this on the next agenda.
Yep.
Yeah,
As an update.
Coordinating.
Sorry to do this to you guys. I just added a half hour.
Thanks a lot, Nicole. But Rebecca's got her hand up, or is that an old hand, Rebecca?
No, that's a new one. David, I did have a question for you. I know several meetings back, we were trying to clarify the responsibilities for the police officer in Windsor, and you and the administrators were going to get together and sort of flush some of that out. And I just wondered if that conversation ever happened.
Yes, it did. And we had a very healthy meeting, and I'm just having the principals verify the duties and responsibilities that they all agreed to when they had that joint meeting. And then we're gonna bring that to the Mount Scottney board and to the Heartland board, actually, because it's gonna go for, right now, Heartland also uses an SRO. So we're gonna use those same duties and responsibilities. So that did happen.
Okay, so yes, I put that on another agenda and I will email that to Amy. Are we ready to take?
Can I make a motion?
He wants to move to adjourn.
Yes.
I want to make a motion to say goodnight and adjourn.
Okay.
Except that we need the task force people to stay on.
Right. Yeah, there's some task force individuals to discuss. So we have a motion. I need a second.
Second. Mark will second.
Okay.
Mark Scott. We'll give it to Scott or Mark. Whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so all in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay.
Happy New Year, everybody. And
Thank you.
the anti-racist task force members will stay on for a minute. We're going to stay on for a little while. And
Okay. And
get us
David, you can stop recording probably because we're just.
I will stop recording. Thank you for reminding me of that. Although that could be interesting.